Hello and welcome to In Conversation here on Daily Mirror. I'm Iswaran Ratnam. My guest today is the High Commissioner of Canada in Sri Lanka, David McKinnon. David, welcome to the program.
Well, welcome to Canada House.
Well, it's good to be here. I mean, there's a lot of history behind Canada House, David. Let's talk a bit about that history.
Okay. Well, the house was built by a Jaffna Tamil doctor and his English wife in the 1930s. And it actually doubled as his consulting rooms on the ground floor. But it's a beautiful sort of example of eclectic 1930s style, I guess. And then Canada leased it. The first High Commissioner, our first High Commissioner here, I'm the 20th, leased it in 1955. And
1955.
And then we bought it in 1966 for a princely sum of 570,000 rupees.
570,000 rupees. How many High Commissioners have been here since then?
Well, the first bought it, first lived in it and rented it, and I'm the 20th.
Okay.
So every High Commissioner since the first one has lived in this house.
And I noticed a lot of, maybe we can just walk through, there's a lot of art around the house.
Well, less than there was before we packed up, but
okay.
There is a lot of Canadian art in the house.
Yes, I guess I need to
Yeah.
mention that you will be leaving Sri Lanka, you're completing your term, or you completed your term and you'll be moving out?
Yes, after 5 years
Okay.
here. But yeah, the house has a mixture of pieces in it. I mean, but there's a lot of Canadian contemporary art or 20th century and more recent art.
This
is a piece by a woman named Jennifer Dixon. It's early 1970s. It's actually taking a famous photo and sort of from the Depression and kind of mixing it together with a prairie scene with the railroad and this kind of thing. These all come from the department's collection. Okay. Our foreign ministry began in the 1930s to collect Canadian contemporary art from Canadian artists early in their career. And in this means that in that time we have developed actually a beautiful collection of 20th century and 21st century Canadian art.
Are you an art person as well?
I do like art, and in fact, but the house didn't really have any of it in here when we came, and so I knew of the resources back in Ottawa and got them to send us quite a nice collection of art from the vault. Most of it figurative, which is my preference, but I know the curator did send us some abstract because she wanted to, I think, challenge my taste. So
something that caught my eye is this piano, though.
It's a Steinway, actually.
Oh, okay.
And it's been here since we took over the house.
Okay.
I think in those days they were standard issue for Canadian heads of mission. I guess the expectation was either the heads of mission were talented musically, which seems unlikely, but I think it was more about entertaining in those days. So and it's a lovely piano. And we're I don't play, my wife does.
Oh, okay. But
we had it restored when we were here by some very capable Sri Lankans, and so it's a beautiful piano. Works very nicely. But it's not only, a lot of this furniture is Canadian, but then there are pieces like this 17th century Dutch era cabinet. Okay. Very old. I think it's calamander wood on the top and satin wood. Gorgeous condition. I mean, it really is a museum piece. I have no idea how it ended up in the house, though.
Yeah.
So it's quite something, but
so it takes a lot to maintain this as well, I guess.
Well, it's actually very well built, and it's actually, put to good use. It's used for storage, and it, something like this is so well built, and the climate is good for it. So we keep using it. So we're very happy.
I know I've seen this painting before when I've come to your house, David, but let's remind our viewers the story behind this painting.
Well, this is one of the pieces that came from our art vault in Ottawa. And in fact, when I saw it in the vault, I said, I want this painting because it says so much about Canada. I mean, these guys are dressed it's called the Explorers. They're dressed for ice fishing or drilling in the ice, but then it's kind of curious because you notice they're actually in a studio. But people, this is the way you see people dressed in the winter in Canada, and I thought, what a better way to, in the heat of Colombo, make people feel a little bit cold.
Yeah.
And so this is a piece that I thought would be wonderful in here. And in fact, the guy who helped us hang the paintings here, he said, put it down at ground level because it'll feel like you're going into the painting. And that's, and I think it's actually, great. It works really well, and I love it. It's in the dining room, so people sitting at the table, they see it, and I hope think a bit of Canada, or think a bit differently. Well, the garden is spectacular, but I'd love to claim credit for that, but it was completely Victoria, my wife. But yeah, the garden here is really quite something. 157 perches of land.
Okay.
And we started doing a lot to fix it up well before COVID, but then during COVID, it was a great lockdown project to really redo it almost completely. Keeping the fact that the Gabriel family who built this, we learned from their daughter-in-law, who's still alive, that they'd chosen very carefully a number of the trees in the garden.
We should actually go out and have a look at the garden as well. So this is part of what your wife handles a lot, I guess.
Absolutely, and with our very hardworking gardener and some other help, obviously. But this is such a beautiful climate. I mean, Colombo, Sri Lanka has drawn people from around the world because of its climate and its ability to grow anything here. Mm-hmm. So we really took the opportunity to revamp the garden, but do it, from the start, we said no burning of waste, compost everything, minimal chemicals, almost none.
Okay.
We wanted a garden where the butterflies would come, the talagoyas are out, the other wildlife are here, the birds come. Everything, and to have this oasis in the middle of Colombo was really the idea.
So while you're at the High Commission, Victoria takes care of the garden.
Yeah. She I think surprised our gardener when maybe the first or second week we were here. She went out and rolled her sleeves up and started cutting things and digging in the garden.
Okay.
But it's the results are just spectacular, and this is the small part of the garden, of course.
Oh, okay. And this is
called a sal tree.
Okay.
And it's very popular in Sri Lanka, I think, because of the flowers. They're used in temples and so on. It's actually Brazilian originally, so a good example of the way flora and fauna come from all around the world to this island.
So you probably miss all this, right?
Absolutely. We've got a garden in Ottawa, but it's not quite like this. So
okay.
It's quite small.
David, you are completing your term here in Sri Lanka. What draws your attention most about the country? What do you like most about the country?
Well, I think it's uniqueness. It took me a while to figure this out, but I started to understand that I think outsiders often misunderstand Sri Lanka because it's tagged loosely as a South Asian country. But it's really better understood as this Indian Ocean island that's close to South Asia, but not really of it. Heavy influence from India, but also the connections, the long trade connections to the east and to the west, the long colonial period. All of these things come across this island, and it has much more of an island sense to it, I think, than mainland countries do. And I really think Sri Lanka is at its best when it's that sort of syncretic aspect of its culture is celebrated and played up. And trying to come up with too sort of narrow of a view of history or of what it is to be Sri Lankan goes against the grain in terms of what I think the reality of the country is. And so it's that diversity that really I find, and that long history coming together.
And you've traveled a lot in Sri Lanka as well. I mean, any specific area that you really love?
Oh.
Any city, that is.
The Gaul is a place that, I went there the first time we came to Sri Lanka in 2008, and been back there many times, and I still just love the atmosphere of it. Even Colombo itself, I think, rewards kind of investigation, and Jaffna has a real sense of place in it, and the history of it, and the local culture, and so on. But I think that it's the archaeological sites, places like Polonnaruwa, I think are exceptional. A lot of the coastline, beautiful, magical experiences in places like up around Minaria for the elephant gathering and this sort of thing. But even places like Mannar, I find, which is bleak in its own way, flat and bleak, fascinating when you sort of put your effort into it and go and talk to people. So, I can really say that we've been to pretty well all corners of this island, and it rarely disappoints. But it really does reward traveling around and talking to people.
And I know you told me earlier that this is a Sri Lankan product.
Yes.
The Sri Lankan art and culture also draw your interest?
It does, and in fact, for some of the reasons I'm talking about, and particularly, the ancient cities are fascinating. The history that they embody is quite something, and the history of the water engineering, hydraulic engineering here is really second to none in many ways. But the art also, the carving places like Polonnaruwa, the ancient or traditional art is impressive. But I actually find myself really drawn to, and my wife has as well, to Sri Lankan contemporary art, which is very distinct, brings its own sensibility to things. Again, having had views formed living many, many years in Delhi, and making that mistake, I think, that every first-time visitor from India makes, that Sri Lanka is a bit of India light. And we knew the Delhi art scene very well, but to come here and find Sri Lanka has this niche of its own. It's different, draws on different experience. Much of the history of conflict and modern Sri Lanka plays out in the art, but so does the diversity, and that you get people trying all kinds of different things. And probably our favorite artist, or certainly the favorite piece that we bought here, is one of it's called Schoolgirl with Yellow Flower, and it's by a guy named Anupa Pereira, who's sort of the Vermeer of Kurunegala. He actually now teaches art up around near Anuradhapura, but it's a very Netherlandish painting, but of a Sri Lankan schoolgirl with Sri Lankan elements to it, and then taped up on the wall is Vermeer's girl with the pearl earring. And that's to me a kind of experimentation that I don't think I would see in a place like India. They experiment in other ways, but that sort of overt engagement with an old European style, but making it its own, I think is quite something. And we find that with the other artists that we've collected as well. That people are willing to experiment, willing to use different media, and so I'm not quite sure where we're going to put all of the art that we've bought. But we've gone. I think we've gone back, if I had to count, probably 7 or 8 canvases at least that we'll be going back with Sri Lanka.
Okay. And what would be the best memories that you will be taking back home?
Best memories of Sri Lanka. Actually, going back to my thing about being at the gathering, that was such a magical experience to sort of sit there in the vehicle with my wife and one of our daughters, and I love elephants, and I always have, and to sort of sit there with 200 elephants around us, doing their business, minding us a little warily, especially if their little ones came towards us. But just really, to me, very magical experience. That's one of the things that will really stand out for me.
Okay. And I just want to talk a bit about the people-to-people connection between Canada and Sri Lanka as well. I mean, we have a great history between both countries. How do you see that? How the connection between Canadians and Sri Lankans?
Well, we have a sizable Sri Lankan origin population in Canada. Probably 250,000 would be a conservative estimate. Probably a bit more than that. We're known for our large Tamil population, obviously, and for a very good reason. They're a vibrant part of particularly Toronto, and are a well-known part of our cultural scene. But there's also large Sinhalese and Muslim populations, and that play their own role and are found from one end of the country to the other, which is really nice to find out. And now that I'm, having lived here and become sensitive to Sinhalese names, for example, I start to see these names popping up in different places when I'm have nothing to do with Sri Lanka, have nothing to do with certainly nothing to do with Toronto. So that's good to see. And those people-to-people links, I think, remain right at the heart of the strength of our relationship. That one time or another we've had. It's no secret we sometimes had tense official relations, diplomatic relations, but there's an endurance that comes with those people-to-people links, and that I can go to talk to politicians who perhaps definitely don't see eye to eye on Canada and certain things, but then I discover they've got family in Canada, they've got connections, and they've got, on that level, they're very, those are soft links that are you can't really recreate in an office. And so I think that's an important, right at the heart of it. And we're seeing now a resurgence in Sri Lankan interest in education, particularly in Canada. We've had a tenfold increase in student permit applications the last 10 years, or 5 years since I arrived. So that's pretty striking. So it's nice to see Canada being appreciated that way as a good destination for study. Well, I think when I talk about traveling around this island and how much it rewards that effort, I think it reminds you that the perspective from Colombo is not the perspective of the rest of the country, and you find little bits and pieces, interesting bits and pieces of Sri Lankan history, and one of that often people in Colombo have almost no idea about. And my favorite one of that was being down in Sabaragamuwa, and I'd known about this Damascus steel having been produced 1,000 years ago. That the world's best steel was coming from here, going to fight off the Crusaders in the Middle East via Damascus. And we happened to be at Sabaragamuwa University, and I asked them about this, and the vice chancellor said, "Oh, we actually have one of the forges that they made this with that had been dug up somewhere nearby." And so they went and showed this to me. But as I say, I find it's a little hard to explain, but there's often such a desire to have one narrative here and to impose one narrative on Sri Lanka's history, often, to be frank, with a political view in mind of it. But then you come upon things like this, which people don't know where to put into it. And it talks about technology, it talks about trade, it talks about geography, people, and it doesn't appear normally in Sri Lankan textbooks. Yet I think it's a wonderful little vignette about an island that 1,000 years ago was doing significant trade with the Middle East and beyond.
So would you be, I know it's too early to ask you, but once you go back, would Sri Lanka be a country that you would be looking at coming back to on a visit?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we're already being pressed. A good friend is getting married in January and is pressing me to come back for the wedding. So that may happen. But no, it's we've lived here 5 years, and we've really, as with other places we've lived, we've really thrown ourselves into getting to know Sri Lanka. And the wonderful thing about Sri Lanka, and Sri Lankans more notably, is I think when you make that effort to get to know them, they're very receptive. They're very comfortable with foreigners, and it just doesn't phase them that you don't quite look like them or you're from somewhere else. They're very, very happy to engage, and so we feel very strong, and there'll be a continuing link, I'm sure, to Sri Lanka.
Well, it was good talking to you, David. Thank you for giving us time to have this conversation with you, and all the best in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much. I thank you for the opportunity, and we'll look forward to crossing paths again, I'm sure.
For sure.